the terrifying fate of the most evil souls after death. The air was thick with the stench of blood and iron. Malachar the Defiler, once the most feared tyrant the world had ever known, lay broken upon the scorched earth, his armor shattered, his body a ruin of gore and splintered bone. The heroes who had finally brought him down stood over him, their weapons still dripping with his blackened blood. His remaining eye, a pale and sunken thing, flickered between them, the knight whose family he had burned alive, the rogue whose city he had drowned in poison, the mage whose soul he had tried to rip apart. Their faces were not triumphant, only weary, only certain. Malachar tried to laugh, but his lungs were pierced, and all that came out was a wet, rattling gasp. He had always known death would come for him, had taunted it, bargained with it, sacrificed thousands to stave it off. But now, as the last of his strength bled out into the mud, something cold slithered into his chest. Not fear, not regret, dread. Because he had seen the rituals, the forbidden texts. He knew what happened to souls like his. The knight raised his sword for the final blow. Malachar wanted to spit a curse, to swear he would return, to promise his vengeance would outlast the stars themselves. But then the blade fell. Darkness. Not the gentle fade of sleep, not the peaceful surrender of a quiet end. This was a violent, yawning abyss, a force like claws sinking into his essence, dragging him down. He tried to scream, but sound did not exist here. He tried to fight, but his limbs were gone. He was nothing now, nothing but awareness, falling, spinning, tumbling through a void that stank of burning hair and rotting meat. And then, a whisper, not in his ears, in his soul. "Welcome, child of ruin." The voice was not one voice, but thousands, layered over each other, some screaming, some laughing, some weeping. Malachar's descent slowed, and for the first time he saw them, shadows in the dark, figures with hollow eyes and grasping hands, watching him, waiting. The last thing he felt before the true horror began was the terrible certainty. This was not death. This was the beginning. Malachar's soul did not drift. It plummeted, as though some vast, unseen hand had snatched him from the world of the living and hurled him into the gullet of the abyss. There was no air, no light, only the sickening sensation of falling forever, his essence unraveling like a burning scroll. The darkness around him was not empty. Things moved in the void, shapes without form, whispers without sound. Fingers, long and skeletal, brushed against him, not touching his flesh, for he had none, but his sins, plucking at them like strings on a rotten harp. He heard laughter, but not with his ears. It vibrated inside his skull, the mirth of something ancient and ravenous. "You are known," the voices hissed, though no mouths spoke. "You are awaited." Then, impact. Not like hitting the ground, but like being swallowed. He crashed onto a jagged plane of blackened stone, his spirit writhing in agony he shouldn't have been able to feel. The sky, if it was a sky, churned with faces. Faces of those he'd slaughtered, their mouths stretched in silent screams, their eyes weeping blood. The ground beneath him pulsed like a living thing, hot and wet, as though he knelt upon the tongue of some colossal beast. A wind howled, but it carried no air, only screams, the echoes of every life he'd ruined, every soul he'd broken. They coiled around him, their voices merging into a single deafening accusation. "Murderer! Tyrant! Monster!" Malachar tried to stand, but the ground shifted beneath him, the stones twisting into hands, skeletal, rotting, countless, clawing at him, dragging him deeper. He fought, But his strength meant nothing here. This was not a place of flesh and blood. This was a place of truth. And the truth was this: he belonged here. The hands pulled him under, not into earth, but into memory. Flashes of his crimes, not as he remembered them, but as his victims had. The child burning in his pyres, the soldier choking on his poisons, the priestess begging as he peeled the skin from her bones. Every scream, every tear, every final gasping breath, he felt them all, sharper than any blade. Then, silence. A voice, deeper than the void itself, spoke. Rise. The hands released him. The ground spat him back onto the obsidian plain. Before him stood the three keepers of damnation, their forms shifting between man and nightmare, their eyes pits of black fire. The tallest leaned down, its breath like a funeral pyre. Your suffering begins now. And Malachar, for the first time in his existence, wept. Malachar's weeping meant nothing here. Tears did not fall in this place. They burned, evaporating into hissing steam before they could even leave his eyes. The three keepers of damnation loomed over him, their shifting forms casting no shadows, for the darkness here was absolute, hungry. The tallest keeper stepped forward, its body a grotesque tapestry of flayed skin and rusted armor. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of 1,000 nooses tightening at once. Malachar the Defiler, it intoned. Child Slayer, Breaker of Oaths, King of Ruins. Each title struck Malachar like a physical blow, searing into his essence. He tried to look away, but the second keeper, a thing of writhing worms and hollowed bone, seized his face in its skeletal grip, forcing him to meet its gaze. You stand before the maw of the damned, it hissed. No lies here, no masks, only truth. The third keeper, a towering figure wreathed in chains, unrolled a scroll that stretched endlessly into the abyss. Upon it, written in liquid fire, were the names of the dead. Every soul you have broken, it rumbled. Every life you have devoured, they cry out, and now they will be heard. The air itself trembled. Then, the dead came, not as ghosts, not as memories, but as wounds ripped open across the fabric of Malachar's soul. A mother, clutching the corpse of her child, his fire had taken them. A soldier, choking on his own blood, his blade had found the man's throat. A sage, his eyes gouged out, his command had ordered it. They did not speak, they accused. And with each face, each life, Malachar felt it, the terror, the pain, the despair. Not as a memory, as if it were happening to him, now, in endless succession. The tallest keeper raised its hand. You have been weighed, it declared. You have been measured. The second keeper leaned in, its breath like rotting meat. And you have been found wanting. The third keeper snapped its fingers. The ground beneath Malachar split, a yawning chasm of teeth and fire and screaming voices. Your torment begins, the keepers spoke as one, and it will never end. Then the abyss took him, and Malachar finally understood. This was not punishment, this was justice. There was no transition, no moment of arrival. One instant, Malachar was falling. The next, he was strapped down, his essence stretched across a rack of black iron that pulsed like a living thing. The air reeked of scorched meat and something fouler, despair thick enough to choke on. Then the blades came. They were not held by any hand. They simply existed in the air around him, curved hooks, jagged razors, needles that glistened with something darker than blood. They hovered, trembling with anticipation. The first cut was not into flesh, it was into memory. The hook slid beneath the surface of his being and peeled. A scream tore from Malachar's throat as a layer of his very self was flayed away. Not skin, not muscle. Identity. The first strip taken was his name. Malakar dissolved into the air like smoke, leaving only a hollow ache where it had been. He thrashed, but the iron held him fast. The next cut came, his titles, his conquests, the fear he had cultivated so carefully. Each one was sheared from him, leaving raw, bleeding gaps in his soul. The blades worked methodically, excising not just his deeds, but the pride he had taken in them. The massacre at Velvireth, the poisoning of the Silver Oath, the slow, deliberate ruin of every good thing he had ever touched. With each loss, the void rushed in to fill the space, whispering, "This is what you are without them." Nothing. Worthless. Forgotten. He tried to cling to the pain, to the anger, anything to anchor himself, but the hooks dug deeper, stripping away even that, his fury, his defiance, his certainty that he had been right. Gone. All gone. What remained was not a man, not a king, not even a monster. Just awareness. Awareness of what he had done. Awareness of what he had lost. Awareness of the truth. This was only the beginning. The blades did not stop. They would never stop. There was no transition, no merciful fade from one horror to the next. One moment, Malakar was a hollowed-out husk, his identity flayed away into the shrieking dark. The next, he was seated, strapped into a grotesque throne of fused bones, his wrists clamped in rusted manacles before a banquet table stretching into endless shadow. The air was thick with the stench of roasting meat and spoiled wine. Before him lay a feast, and it was still alive. The platters twitched, the meat breathed, the goblets overflowed with a liquid too dark to be wine, too thick to be blood. The figures seated around him, shapes of smoke and screaming mouths, turned their hollow gazes upon him, their skeletal fingers gesturing to the meal. "Eat," they whispered, a sound like maggots writhing in dead flesh. Malakar's hands moved without his will, seizing a knife and fork blackened with age. His trembling fingers carved into the nearest dish, a great glistening roast, its surface seared and weeping. The meat screamed as the blade pierced it. A voice he recognized. General Verith, the man who had served him loyally until Malakar had him butchered for questioning orders. The first bite forced itself into Malakar's mouth. It was warm, it struggled on his tongue, he retched, but his jaws clamped shut, his teeth grinding. The taste was not of flesh, but of memory. Verith's last moments, his betrayal, his terror as the executioner's axe fell. Malakar felt it all, as if it were his own death. And yet, he swallowed. The feast roared to life around him. The bread was the ground bones of the villages he'd raised. The wine was the tears of widows. The fruits burst with the eyes of children, staring, accusing as he devoured them. And he had to devour them. The moment he hesitated, the manacles burned, searing into his wrists, the chains dragging him forward. The shadow guests leaned in, their breath like open graves. "Eat," they commanded. "Feast. You are hungry. You will always be hungry." And Malakar realized this was no punishment. This was restoration. Every bite returned to him what the flaying had taken. Not his pride, not his power, but the weight of his crimes. The faces, the names, the suffering. He remembered. He felt. And worst of all, he could not stop. The feast stretched onward, infinite. And the hunger grew. The feast did not end. It vanished. One moment, Malakar's mouth was filled with the taste of charred flesh and the screams of the dead. The next, he was alone, kneeling before an enormous mirror that stretched into the blackness above, its surface rippling like liquid mercury. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. It was theirs. The faces of the dead, thousands upon thousands, pressed against the glass from within, their mouths open in silent howls, their hands splayed as if begging for release, their hollow eyes bored into him, unblinking, judging. A whisper slithered through the air, not from the mirror, but from the darkness behind him. See? The glass shimmered. And then he saw. Not his deeds as he remembered them, grand conquests, necessary cruelties, but as they were, a village burning, not as a strategic triumph, but as a slaughter. Children stumbling through the smoke, their skin peeling away like parchment. A mother clutching her infant, both reduced to blackened bone. The mirror forced him to watch, not from above, as a commander surveying his work, but from within, as one of the dying. He felt the flames, he choked on the ash. The scene changed. A dungeon, a prisoner, a knight who had defied him, strapped to a table. Malachar had ordered his fingernails ripped out, one by one. Now he was that knight, screaming as the pliers bit into flesh, as the pain lanced up his arms like white-hot wire. The mirror showed him everything, every rape, every mutilation, every act of casual, grinning malice, and with each vision, the whispers grew louder. This is what you did. This is what you are. Malachar tried to close his eyes. He couldn't. The images came faster now, a relentless flood of suffering, each more vivid than the last. He saw the consequences of his actions, rippling outward like poison in a well. A father, driven mad by grief, murdering his remaining family before hanging himself. A kingdom collapsing into famine and cannibalism after he burned its crops. Generations of trauma, all tracing back to him. The faces in the mirror began to merge, their features twisting into a single monstrous visage, his own. But not as he had been, as he truly was, a thing of hunger and spite, a blight upon existence itself. The mirror's surface began to bulge, the hands of the damned pressing outward, reaching for him. And then, "Now," whispered the darkness, "you will join them." The glass shattered, and the dead pulled him in. The hands of the dead released him, only to hurl him into emptiness. Malachar tumbled through the void, his essence raw from the mirror's judgment. Then, light, a flicker, faint as a dying candle, but real in the suffocating dark. It took shape, a narrow tunnel of jagged stone leading upward. A voice, soft, almost kind, whispered from within, "Climb." For the first time since his damnation, something like relief shuddered through him. Escape. He lunged for the passage, his spirit suddenly weightless. The walls were rough, carved with the names of the dead, but he barely noticed. He climbed, fingers scrabbling against the stone, his mind burning with a single thought. Out. Outside. Out. The higher he went, the brighter the light grew. No longer a candle, but a sun, golden and warm. He could almost feel it on his face, almost remember what warmth was. Then, a ledge, a doorway, freedom. Malachar dragged himself over the edge, gasping, and found himself standing in the throne room of his old palace. Sunlight streamed through stained glass. The air smelled of incense and polished oak. His armor, unbroken, unbloodied, hung on his body once more. A servant bowed before him. "My king," the man murmured. Malachar's breath caught. Was it all a nightmare? Had he won? He reached for the servant's face, then froze. The man's eyes were missing. Empty sockets stared back at him, weeping thick, black tears. "Did you think," whispered the servant, "it would be that easy?" The throne room melted. The sunlight curdled into pus-yellow fog. The tapestries unraveled into nooses. The servant's body collapsed into a pile of severed hands, still twitching, and the doorway, the beautiful, shining doorway, was gone. In its place stood the three keepers, their faces carved into the same rictus grin. "Hope," the tallest crooned, "is the cruelest torment of all." The ground beneath Malachar gave way, and he fell. Again. The fall did not end. It changed. Malachar's body, or the wretched illusion of it, slammed into damp earth. The air reeked of wet fur and iron. A forest of blackened, skeletal trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their branches twisted into grasping claws. A blood-red moon hung motionless in a starless sky. Then, a howl, not from one throat, from hundreds. Malachar tried to run before his mind even processed the terror. His legs moved on instinct, bare feet sinking into the cold mud. The howls came again, closer now, vibrating through his bones. Shadows darted between the trees, too fast, too many. He risked a glance back. Mistake. The beasts were not wolves. They were mockeries of wolves, stitched together from flayed skin and jagged bone, their eyes the same hollow voids as the dead in the mirror, and their faces. He knew them. The first hunter to close the distance had the snarling visage of Captain Dane, the soldier who'd led Malachar's vanguard before being left to die on a forgotten battlefield. The next wore the melted features of the alchemist he'd fed to her own failed experiments. Dozens more, each a victim, each hungry. Malachar ran harder. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed. It didn't matter. The first beast lunged, its teeth sinking into his shoulder. Pain exploded, not just flesh, but memory. Dane's last moments choking on his own blood, cursing Malachar's name. The vision swallowed him whole, drowning him in another man's dying rage. Then, silence. He was whole again, standing at the forest's edge. The howls began anew, the hunt reset. This time he didn't run. He fought. His hands found a rusted sword half buried in the muck. When the next beast attacked, he swung, and the blade passed through its body like smoke. The creature's jaws closed around his throat. New pain, new death. Another reset. Malachar understood now. He was not just prey. He was both. Sometimes he ran, sometimes they did. When the tables turned, when he became the hunter, the sword in his hand was suddenly real. But the beasts now wore the faces of those he'd failed to save. The child he'd ignored in the burning village. The servant he'd refused to pardon. Every kill hurt, every death scarred. The forest stretched on, the moon never moved, and the hunt never ended. The hunt dissolved like smoke. One moment Malachar was gripping the rusted sword, his phantom lungs heaving. The next, silence. The forest was gone. The beasts were gone. He stood alone in a vast, lightless amphitheater of black stone, its architecture too jagged, too wrong to be the work of mortal hands. And then, it spoke. Not a voice, a presence, vast as a collapsing star, crushing the air from his lungs. Malachar. The name hit him like a physical blow, reverberating through his essence. The ground beneath him trembled, cracks splitting open to reveal a churning abyss of screaming faces, countless souls all trapped in their own eternal torments. A shadow moved at the edge of vision. No, not a shadow. An absence, a shape carved from the void itself, towering above him, its form shifting between 100 nightmares, a crowned skeleton, a mass of weeping eyes, a thing of hooks and teeth and endless hunger. The Lord of the Abyss. It leaned down, and Malachar felt its gaze like acid on his soul. "You have tasted your sins," it whispered, the sound slithering into his mind. "You have worn your suffering like a second skin, but you do not yet understand." The amphitheater's walls melted, revealing an infinite expanse of suffering, realms upon realms of personalized damnation, each soul trapped in a hell crafted from their own cruelty. Malachar saw a poisoner drowning in his own toxins, his flesh eternally dissolving, a betrayer flayed by the hands of those he'd sold out, a warlord trampled beneath the hooves of an army that would never stop charging. "This is not punishment," the Lord murmured. "This is balance, the universe correcting itself." Malachar tried to scream, but his voice was gone. The Lord's form solidified, a monstrous parody of his own face, stretched across a void. "Your torment will evolve," it said. "It will innovate. For eternity, Malachar. Not because we hate you." A pause. "But because you earned it." The ground gave way. Malachar fell. Not into fire, not into ice, but into nothingness. A void where even pain did not exist. Where he was utterly, excruciatingly alone. For the first time, true horror seized him. This was the revelation. Hell was just beginning. True silence, not the absence of sound, but the consumption of it. Malachar floated in the void, unmoored from time, from sensation, from even the memory of pain. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if this was oblivion. Then, a pulse, like a dying heartbeat, weak but insistent. The darkness shuddered, the void contracted, and suddenly Malachar was somewhere else. A city, his city. The streets of Vel Vireth stretched before him, bathed in the golden light of dawn. The air smelled of baking bread and blooming jasmine. Laughter echoed from the market square. For the first time in what felt like millennia, Malachar breathed. He looked down at his hands, whole, unblemished, the weight of his armor, the familiar grip of his sword at his hip, the warmth of the sun on his face. Real. It had to be real. A child darted past him, giggling, a wooden toy clutched in her hands. Malachar reached out, and his fingers passed through her. The laughter died, the sunlight dimmed, the city rotted in front of him. Wooden stalls collapsed into ash, the cobblestones cracked, oozing black sludge. The people, the smiling, living people, twisted into emaciated corpses, their hollow eyes turning toward him. The little girl stood before him, her toy now a rusted dagger. "Why?" she whispered. Malachar stumbled back, and the ground gave way. He fell through streets that melted into temples, that dissolved into battlefields, each one a memory, each one wrong. Then, impact. He knelt in a field of bones. The sky burned. Before him stood a door, an ordinary weathered oak door, slightly ajar. Golden light spilled from the crack. A voice, soft and familiar, called from within. "Come home." Malachar knew it was a lie. He knew it was another torment. But the part of him that was still human, the part that had not yet been flayed away, ached for it. His fingers brushed the door, it swung open, and the abyss took him again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.